I would say that the level of relationship is a 10. We have a great relationship. Angela and Emmanuel and Justin, I would say the relationship is a 10.
Apparently, that would be a 10 on a scale of 1 to 100. Because just a few hours later, despite all the smiles, Trump pulled the U.S. out of the G7 joint communique and called his Canadian counterpart, quote, very dishonest and weak. Trump was responding, it seems, to Prime Minister Trudeau's Love Actually moment Saturday afternoon as he promised to retaliate for Trump's tariffs.
It's kind of insulting. Canadians, we're polite, we're reasonable, but we also will not be pushed around.
Joining me now, Natasha Bertrand of The Atlantic, Frank Figliuzzi, national security analyst, Jason Johnson of TheRoot.com, and Dana Milbank of The Washington Post. Thank y'all for being here. And Frank, I'm going to start with you first. The photo that sort of has come to define everything that we understand about the G7 meeting is that classic picture of Angela Merkel sort of leaning over Donald Trump. I think we have it. There it is, that photo where it seemed that the whole world is sort of bearing down on Donald Trump, and he's sort of defiantly with his arms crossed. But the thing that will define this G7 summit, Frank, is the President of the United States pulling the U.S. out of the final communique, the final joint declaration, and then attacking one of our very closest allies, Canada, calling its prime minister weak. What do you make of the last 24 hours?
Well, first, if these relationships are a 10, I'd hate to see what a 4 looks like. Where I come from in a career leading counterintelligence for the U.S. government, Joy, is I cringe at this. I cringe because I know that behind the scenes, we have relationships at an intelligence level with all of these allies, and I worry deeply about the impact of these tensions and the eroding of relationships at the leadership level on the level of national security. What do I mean by that? We essentially operate with our allies as one solid country. We share intelligence. We don't spy on each other. And since the end of World War II, we've decided that we have common interests, common friends, and common adversaries. So when you see the president coming out asking for Russia to rejoin the G7, when you see his confusing relationship toward Putin, you have to wonder whether at some point our allies are going to say to our intelligence services, we're not sharing sensitive intel on Russia or China with you because we no longer trust you. Yeah,
and you know, Natasha, you have John Bolton tweeting out that same photo that we just showed, the national security advisor now, a longtime war hawk, tweeting it out. And his caption for that photo was, just another G7 where other countries expect America will always be their bank. The president made it clear today, no more. Attacking our allies, sort of ridiculing them. You know, how is that playing among Republicans in Washington? Because they've been awfully quiet, other than John McCain tweeting out and telling our allies, no, we're still with the West.
And that will likely continue to be the case. I mean, time after time, when the president has upended norms in terms of the United States' position in the international community, especially, the Republicans have been extremely silent, even as people like John Bolton and Larry Kudlow this morning have been piling on to one of our closest allies. And I think that one of the biggest mysteries about all of this is that, you know, Russia can interfere in our elections. They can, they can work with, allegedly work with the Trump campaign to help them win. They can, kind of interfere in our democratic process, and they are worthy of membership in the G8. President Trump wants to make the G7 into the G8, thinking that Russia deserves a seat at the table. But one of our allies, Canada, pushes back on things that the president has said in a press conference, and suddenly the president thinks that that's worthy of pulling out altogether of the communique. And I think that Larry Kudlow especially said something very revealing this morning, which is that this is, the president did not want to show weakness ahead of this North Korea summit. And in that sense, he said that this was all in large part due to the president not wanting to appear, weak on the international stage before this summit. And that really is what it comes down to, in large part, is the president's ego. He felt as though the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, was undermining him. And before he met with the dictator, Kim Jong-un, he wanted to look good. And, now he's considering putting an embassy in Pyongyang, according to reports, and all at the same time he's considering, he's thinking that Russia deserves a seat at this table, and all the while he's completely alienating some of our closest allies. So this is really something where if Republicans don't step up soon, it's going to be a big problem.
I mean, Jason Johnson not wanting to appear weak, so fighting with Canada? I mean, you had Republicans claiming that President Obama made America look weak by negotiating really an historic deal with Iran, right? And that suddenly now the idea that Natasha's talking about, that the president is considering putting an embassy in Pyongyang, talking up Kim Jong-un, talking up the now president for life of China. This clip has been making the rounds again. It isn't new, but a lot of people have been tweeting it out again this morning, that Donald Trump not only wants Russia back in and wants the G7 to be the G8, but has taken their side for quite a long time on the thing that got them kicked out, them seizing Crimea. Donald Trump in 2016 said on This Week with George Stephanopoulos, well, you know, the people of Crimea, from what I've heard, would rather be with Russia than where they were. And you have to look at that also. He was clarifying what he'd said in a press conference, that he would consider recognizing Crimea as a part of Russia and lifting the sanctions against Russia for taking it.
This is the thing, Joy. I mean, we've all gone down this just litany of incompetence and errors that this president and this administration has made at the G7. Here's what concerns me most, to be perfectly honest. This sort of glib way that they say, well, this will all be fine. Right? We'll work it out. It'll all be a 10. It's just another G7 thing, right? They all think this is going to be fine down the road. And what they don't seem to realize is that every single one of these leaders has to go home to their country. And every single one of these leaders now has to have a more emboldened and more anti-American stance so that they don't look weak in their own countries. So the President of the United States simultaneously always sees himself as a victim, but seems to perpetuate the kinds of conflicts that make other countries not want to work with us. And that's one of the biggest problems that we've got leaving the summit. And I'll also say this, if you assume the G7 is kind of like a group project, this attitude that he has that, like, well, I didn't like Susie over there, so I'm out of the group project. What difference does it make if he's unhappy with Trudeau? It's the G7. If the president had said, I didn't want to sign the communique because it talked about support for the Paris Treaty, that actually would have made sense from a policy standpoint from this administration. But instead, he turns it into a personal spit fight on the playground.
Yeah, and Dana, I think that is a really good point, because Donald Trump sometimes acts as if these other world leaders don't also have a public. That Enrique Peña Nieto could not have been bullied around, and then there are elections in his country too. That Prime Minister Trudeau has to answer to his own public. They just can't let Trump just punch them in the face and do tariffs and not do anything. He does act as if no one else has a public to answer to. But at the same time, he doesn't. He literally does not take the same sort of tough guy stance ever with Russia. That is, it stands out on, I have to say, in his dealings with these other countries.
Yeah, Joy. I mean, Trudeau was in some domestic trouble at home, and this is going to be a huge boost for him. Macron in France was getting a lot of grief for being soft on Trump, and now you see him literally leaving his thumb imprint on the president's hand. So certainly there will be a backlash here. As well, there should be. I mean, think about the surreal situation of our president making nice with North Korea and then having a war of words and possibly setting off a trade war with, of all countries, Canada, which has done nothing hostile to us in its history, except maybe for Justin Bieber. And at the same time, you have Dan Coates, overseeing intelligence, saying just on Friday that Russia's goal is to interfere in the midterm elections and to split the Western Alliance, the transatlantic alliance. What does Donald Trump do the next day? He does his best to split the Atlantic alliance by trying to inject Russia back, make it a G8 again, and creating all this division. This was a huge victory for Vladimir Putin this weekend. Yeah,
absolutely. Last word to you, Natasha. Any updates on why that might be? Because everyone seems to have noticed that Donald Trump really does seem to want to do whatever it is that Russia wants. How might that be?
That's the big question. I mean, no one seems to know why that is. But I will say that one concern that I've been seeing is that Trump won't want to blow up 2 summits in a row. So is that going to give Kim Jong-un more leverage as Trump walks into this summit, because he's going to want some kind of success, some kind of victory after he kind of became, the pariah in terms of our, the G7. So is he going to walk into that meeting determined to make something happen, and will that give Kim Jong-un the leverage that he, needs?
Yeah.
That remains to be seen.
Yeah, given that probably only one person that's going to be at that group homework assignment actually did the reading, and it won't be the President of the United States. Natasha Bertrand, thank you very much. Appreciate you being here. Frank, Jason, and Dana will be back in our next hour. And coming up,